We're starting terrifying and descending straight into hell. Number 9. Scaphism. Picture this. You've been convicted of some crime against the king, maybe treason, maybe just looking at him funny on a bad day, and the punishment isn't death. Not yet, anyway. Death would be a mercy here. Instead, the executioners strip you down and force-feed you a mixture of milk and honey until you've basically got diarrhea on demand. Then they take one boat and board and sandwich you between them like the world's worst sandwich, with only your head, hands, and feet sticking out. More honey gets smeared all over your exposed skin, especially your face, because here's the thing, that honey isn't for flavor, it's bait. The boat gets set adrift on a stagnant pond under the brutal Persian sun, and now the insects show up. Flies, wasps, beetles, all drawn to the honey, all starting to feast and lay eggs in every orifice they can find. Meanwhile, your own digestive system is working against you because that milk and honey diet causes massive bacterial buildup. And as you defecate uncontrollably, it just attracts more insects and accelerates infection. Over days, sometimes over 2 weeks according to ancient accounts, you're basically being eaten alive from the inside and outside simultaneously while baking in the sun. The Greek historian Plutarch documented a case of a soldier named Mithridates who allegedly survived this for 17 days. Now imagine being conscious for most of that. Number 8. The Brazen Bull. This one's almost a black comedy if it weren't real. A bronze worker named Perilos pitched this invention to the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas as the ultimate execution device. The design is deceptively simple, a hollow bronze bull with a door in the side. You shove the condemned person inside, seal the door, and light a fire underneath. As the metal heats up, the person inside essentially gets slow roasted alive, like a turkey nobody asked for. But here's the genius, or rather the horror, of the design. The bull's head was rigged with a series of tubes and reeds that converted the victim's screams into something that sounded like an actual bull bellowing. So from the outside, all anyone heard was this eerie, distorted roaring, which honestly probably made it worse for everyone listening, not knowing it was a person. But wait, there's another version of this as well. According to legend, Phalaris was so impressed and so paranoid that this guy might build something even worse for someone else, that he had Perilos be the very first person to test his own invention. Talk about a performance review gone wrong. Phalaris himself was later overthrown and, fittingly, was reportedly killed in his own bronze bull. Karma had jokes that day. Number 7. The Judas Cradle. This device looks almost comically simple, just a pyramid-shaped seat, often made of wood or metal, with the point facing upward. The victim gets hoisted up by ropes attached to their wrists and ankles, then slowly lowered down so that the pointed apex of the pyramid presses directly into the perineum or genitals. Now here's the mechanical horror of it. Gravity does the work. The victim's own body weight forces them down onto the point, and any attempt to relieve the pressure by tensing muscles just exhausts them faster, causing them to sink down even more. Inquisitors would use this device repeatedly over hours or even days, often combining it with other tortures to extract confessions. The stretching and tearing of tissue led to severe internal damage, infections, and in many documented cases, death from sepsis days or weeks later. The irony, if you can call it that, is that this device was specifically designed not necessarily to kill quickly, but to be a tool of psychological terror, often used just to extract a confession before the real punishment began. Because apparently, for medieval inquisitors, this was just step 1. Number 6. Lingchi. This punishment was reserved for the absolute worst crimes: treason, patricide, and similar offenses against the social order. Here's the setup. The condemned would be tied to a wooden frame, often in a public square in front of a crowd. Then, executioners would begin systematically slicing off pieces of the body. We're talking small cuts to the arms, legs, chest, sometimes the removal of ears, fingers, and other extremities. The number of cuts varied historically, anywhere from a few dozen and up to 3,000, according to some legendary and likely exaggerated accounts. The goal wasn't always to kill quickly. Sometimes opium was administered beforehand to keep the victim conscious longer without them passing out from shock, because a fainted victim ruins the whole spectacle. Eventually, a final fatal cut, often to the heart or throat, would end it. French soldiers stationed in China actually photographed several of these executions in the early 1900s, and those images are some of the most disturbing historical photographs ever taken. Just a friendly reminder that we're only on number 6, folks. Number 5. The rack. The mechanics here are brutally straightforward, almost industrial. Picture a wooden frame, like a giant table, with rollers at each end. The victim is laid down, and their wrists and ankles are tied to ropes connected to these rollers. Then, the torturer turns a crank, which winds the ropes around the rollers, slowly pulling the victim's body in opposite directions. At first, it's just intense stretching, your joints popping and grinding. But as the cranking continues, the pressure builds until tendons start tearing, ligaments snap with audible pops, and eventually joints can be dislocated or even completely separated. The sound alone was apparently enough to make some prisoners confess to literally anything just from hearing it happen to someone else. A famous case involves a Jesuit priest named Henry Walpole, racked in 1594, who reportedly couldn't move his limbs for weeks afterward. So yeah, even if you survived, your body was basically wrecked for life. Great trade-off. Number 4. The rat bull. This one relies less on blades and more on biology, specifically the survival instincts of a very hungry rodent. The victim is strapped down, completely immobilized, usually lying flat on their back. Then, a metal bowl or cage is placed directly on the victim's bare stomach or chest, with one or more live rats trapped inside it alongside them. Hot coals are piled on top of the bowl, heating the metal. The rat, suddenly trapped in an increasingly scorching enclosure with no way out except down, does what any panicked animal would do. It starts digging. Except down means through the victim's flesh. The rat begins clawing and gnawing through skin, muscle, and eventually into the abdominal cavity. Imagine the sensation. First the scratching, frantic and rhythmic, then the bite, then the tearing, as the rat works methodically deeper. Death was usually from massive blood loss, organ damage, or shock, and could take a horrifyingly long time depending on how many rats were used and how slowly the heat was applied. Some historical accounts claim this method was used specifically during interrogations, with the process started and then paused, giving the victim just long enough to answer questions before the bowl went back on. The sheer psychological horror of this punishment has made it one of the most infamous torture concepts ever recorded. Number 3. The Iron Maiden. Now here's the thing. A lot of historians actually argue this device is largely a myth, more of an 18th or 19th century invention used for shock value museum exhibits. But the concept itself is still terrifying enough to make this list. A human-shaped cabinet, lined on the inside with sharp iron spikes. The victim is placed inside, and the door is slowly closed. The spikes are positioned to avoid immediately vital organs, instead piercing the arms, legs, shoulders, and torso. Victim is slowly dying from blood loss or infection over hours or days. Even though the specific Iron Maiden, as commonly depicted, is likely a fabrication, similar spiked cages and devices absolutely did exist throughout history, which honestly says more about human creativity for cruelty than any single device could. Number 2. Crucifixion. This wasn't just about killing someone, it was about making an example, often along major roads, so as many people as possible would see it. The victim's wrists, where the bones can actually support body weight, are nailed or tied to a horizontal beam. This beam is then hoisted up and attached to a vertical post, already standing in the ground. The feet get nailed too, often through the heel bones. In this position, breathing becomes incredibly difficult. To exhale, the victim has to push up with their legs and pull with their arms, which puts agonizing pressure on the nail wounds and forces the body into unnatural positions. As exhaustion sets in over hours, the victim can no longer push themselves up to breathe properly, and death eventually comes from asphyxiation, combined with blood loss, dehydration, and shock. Roman soldiers would sometimes break the legs of crucified victims, specifically to speed up death by removing their ability to push up and breathe. So breaking someone's legs was, in this context, the merciful option. Number 1. Flaying. The process is exactly what it sounds like, and it's worse than you're imagining. Skilled executioners would use sharp knives to carefully separate the skin from the underlying muscle and tissue. The goal was frequently to remove the skin in as large, intact pieces as possible, sometimes even keeping the victim alive throughout the entire process. Without skin, the body loses its ability to regulate temperature and fluid loss. Exposed nerve endings create unimaginable pain with every movement of air, and infection sets in almost immediately. Assyrian kings would sometimes display the skins of flayed enemies on city walls as a warning to others. And to the unlucky individuals subjected to this, they never actually got the mercy of unconsciousness. And on that absolutely cheerful note, that wraps up our countdown.